Faces of Alaska, Martin Buser.
You probably already know a lot about Martin Buser, the legendary Iditarod champion from Big Lake. But what you might not know is how he came to Alaska and why he stayed. We talked to Martin about the big decisions he faced after coming to Alaska as a young Swiss college graduate.
Grew up in a hardworking family, and like I said, my dad was an orthopedic surgeon, and I pledged I would never work that hard in my life. In my teenage years, I ended up getting infatuated with the sled dogs in the local region in Switzerland. Central Europe had a small sled dog community, had mostly purebred. In those days, the dogs had to be purebred, registered Nordic dogs. So there was the Malamutes, the Samoyeds, the Akita Inus, and of course the Siberian Huskies. They were the breeds exclusively used for the sled dog sport. In a nearby village, a couple had a bunch of sled dogs, and I ended up spending pretty much all my spare time learning from them and helping them train the Siberians. And then after my military service and all my schooling was done, I said, I'm going to Alaska for a year.
What prompted that? Why did you decide you wanted to go to Alaska?
Well, I had lots of job opportunities, and I always tell people that in Switzerland your life is sort of predetermined. You know, you're married to a job and then maybe a spouse in that order of importance and priority. And I had finished second in my class and immediately had received various job offers. I had studied horticulture and I could have worked the next day. And I kind of looked at that situation, and I was still very much infatuated with the sled dogs. And I said, I have all these job offers, which you shouldn't turn down, of course, if you're a Central European, strict, Swiss boy of working hard and making a living and all that. I said, I'm going to Alaska for a year. I'm sure when I come back, one of those jobs will still be open, or I'll find a new one. Not really ever intended to not go back. I loved Switzerland. My whole family was there. I had lots of friends, and it was not a place I wanted to leave.
How old were you?
I was 21, in my early 20s, and I had made, because of the Siberian Husky connection, I had made lots of contacts in Alaska, especially with a couple, Earl and Natalie Norris in Willow. They were the most noted Siberian Husky breeders in Alaska because they had up to 250 dogs, and for years, again, because of the purebred connection, had sent dogs to Switzerland and other Central European countries. So I knew about them, and they learned about me a little bit, and they, very much like we do nowadays, had room for apprentices, people that wanted to work hard in return for the knowledge gained with the dogs. So in April of '79, I came to Alaska simply to have an adventure, not to live the sled dog life or live the Alaskan experience for the rest of my life. I knew I could probably stay here for a year legally and with the tourist visas and all that. And Earl and Natalie liked my interactions with the dogs, and at one point they said, would you like to run the Iditarod? Well, of course, I had heard about the Iditarod, and they had never tested their dogs really on the Iditarod Trail. Earl and Natalie both had run the speed races, the Fur Rendezvous, and all those fast races with their dogs, but they never really had much experience with long-distance events. And of course, it took me about a split second to say, sign me up, And so I stayed with Earl and Natalie, and in 1980, I ran my first Iditarod with their dogs. We call them my dogs, but they were clearly their dogs. They were registered Siberian Huskies, and I finished, I think, in 21st place. Pretty much right after that, Earl and Natalie asked me, would you like to do it again with the better dogs? Clearly, because of my inexperience and because of our relatively young relationship, I didn't get the A team. But finishing in 21st place, that was pretty attractive to all of us. And then I got the offer to next year do it with the A team. Well, another split-second decision-making process. Sign me up, and so in 1980 and 1981, I ran both Iditarods with Siberian Huskies.
Had you traveled that great a distance before the race?
Oh, absolutely not. No, and even before the race, I really knew nothing. I mean, looking back, some of us early rookies in the early 80s, we went into this Iditarod experience, not kind of like in the early 70s when they first started the race, not knowing, are we going to get there? Where is what? And how long is it going to take us, So we were pretty green, the whole sport of long distance racing was pretty green, but it was already a noted thing, and people that were training dogs, of course, they were into following the Iditarod, so.
The offer to run a second Iditarod cemented his decision to stay and set the stage for what would become decades of racing and success.
You've seen so much change in 30 Iditarods. What do you think it will be like in 30 more?
Well, hopefully I'll be around another 30 years to see all the changes that are happening. And you're correct. I describe our generation, Didi Johnrow, myself, Rick Swenson. We are the first professionals that chose this as a career, the first generations of full-time dog racers. There was no such thing before the Iditarod. Nobody could make a living. Nobody still can make a living off of the Iditarod, and we hope that is going to change. The $400,000 that get distributed amongst the top 30, nobody meets expenses. We wish that was Iditarod's priority, to give that to the winner or the eventual winner. So maybe 10, 20, 30 years from now, maybe we have enough zeros behind the equation where young people actually have the vision of, if I do well in Iditarod, maybe I can make it. Right now it's still 18 hours a day. You got to have 2 or 3 different things going for yourself in order to live with and for the dogs exclusively. So, but since we are the first generation of full-time racers, you do see all sorts of new innovations. The sit-down sleds, I call it an OMS, an old musher sled. When I was 20 years old, I didn't need to sit down. But after 30 Iditarods, I guarantee I'm never going to go anywhere without a sit-down sled, just because of those few minutes that we can rest. A little windshield on the handlebar, that was nothing 20 years ago. I was tough. But now having that little change of a 3-ounce piece of Lexan that might deflect the wind a little bit over my face, and that makes a big difference. So the innovations, the changes that have come in part are because we are the first generations of professionals that have been doing it for a career.
Making a career in business from raising and racing sled dogs became Boozer's professional driving force, but deciding to leave his home country of Switzerland permanently wasn't easy.
So you stayed. What did you have to do then what did your family think about that?
Well, that started to become a little a big question mark in my family, of course. You said a year, and now you're staying another year. But being young and having had a fallback plan comforted my parents. That was always the deal, that you have to be able to take care of yourself, one way or another. So I had finished my studies, I had done the military and all that. So I could go back any given day. If things don't work out in Alaska, you can always come back and you can work in good old Switzerland. That never needed to happen. So I stayed all summer, traveled around a bit. At one point climbed McKinley or was an assistant guide in climbing McKinley, and had a lot of Alaskan adventures, of course, which is wonderful as a young 20-some-year-old guy. You do all the Yukon River experience, and having traveled the initial Iditarod, I made lots of friends up and down the Iditarod Trail. So I ended up going to some of those Yukon River communities, and then of course ran another Iditarod.
Now you're in Alaska for another year, and at what point did you decide, I want to stay and be an Alaskan? When did that happen?
I think the second Iditarod made me an Alaskan, but I got so used to the elbow room, the freedom, the space, the size of this, I call it a country, Alaska. Anywhere else in the world would be its own country. I got so used to the space and the mentality of the people that after my second Iditarod, I was so hooked on the lifestyle, on the beauty of the land, and to some degree on the dogs. Not necessarily the Siberian Huskies. I had a couple of epiphanies of how things could be done different on the Iditarod Trail. But I was hooked on the lifestyle, so to speak. Clearly, still didn't have any means or any financial ways of making it possible for myself. But I kind of knew this was going to be my home. Then, of course, things started snowballing. Then I met my wife. She, too, had come to this country from New Orleans in 1979. And when we first met, she was getting ready to leave, getting ready to go back home and you know, take her black lab home and become a Southern girl again. And
Where did you meet?
we met in Anchorage, actually, in several different locations, mutual friends, and lots of side stories along that, of course. One of them was we met at the land office after we both had staked a few acres of land. She had staked the parcel that we now live in, together with a whole bunch of other friends. And I had staked a 20-acre parcel up in Trappers Creek. And I was hot and bothered because somebody claimed they had staked it, but they didn't. And I was at the land office complaining that they paper staked. And of course, in a broken accent, you know, I stood out like a Thor thumb. And Kathy was there filing her paperwork. So that's the first time we kind of saw each other. And long story short, she never left. We now have both been here since '79. And
when did you start to feel like a typical Alaskan? When did you know that I really am an Alaskan now?
I kind of grew up here. The division between being a Swiss was made sometime during, and an Alaskan was made during my first two Iditarods. And then all my skills, my true skills, my life skills, and my dog skills, and my adult skills were acquired in this country. So on paper I was Swiss, but in spirit I was Alaskan. And of course that later on becomes a whole different story when I then did become American. Because for decades I was Alaskan. I was Alaskan at heart, and I joke that when I did good in Iditarod, they claimed I was from Big Lake or from somewhere, and when I did poorly I was a Swiss, you know. So in fact, the first time Robert Sorley ever won the Iditarod, he was lauded as the first foreigner to ever win the Iditarod. Well, you should have heard my, at the time, 80-some-year-old mother. Oh, she hit up all the media that her sonny boy was Swiss when he won his first 3 Iditarods. She came to my defense.
Who's your best PR agent?
That's right, but I felt Alaskan. I felt Alaskan right after. I think once you run Iditarod, you feel Alaskan.
Racing success didn't come overnight, but Boozer worked hard to build on his knowledge of dogs, starting almost from scratch.
How does running dogs in Alaska differ from your experiences in Switzerland?
Oh, there's no comparison, you know. People, because of my somewhat limited success, people know about dog mushing in Switzerland a little bit, but it's a fringe sport like it is if you go to Tallahassee, Florida, and you say, I'm a dog musher, they might say, oh, have you done the Iditarod? You know, they don't know that I have done the Iditarod now 30 times. So I say it's become a Scrabble word. So people know about the Iditarod. That's probably the most popular dog race there is. You could never make a living in Switzerland working with dogs. You can hardly make a living in Alaska working dogs alone. You know, there's only a handful of us that have been able to work the spin-offs to the point where we're financially stable enough to pay electricity bills and car payments and all that. Working odd jobs, because having dogs is a very expensive undertaking. So working 18-hour days was not at all unusual, because I started building this house too. So I laugh when the kids nowadays say, well, you got it made. You know, I said, well, you too can have it made. You know, 18-hour days for 15 years, and you can have just about anything. And you know, a kid the other day told me, well, I can't work 18-hour days. I want picnics with my kids. I said, you know, there's not a single picnic I missed. I just missed a few hours of sleep.
Those 18-hour days and 15 years of hard work, how much of that do you think you can attribute to your industrious, hardworking people, as Swiss people are known as? And how much of it was because you were driving to this dream of the life that you have today?
I've worked a lot with American kids, some Alaskan kids, and rarely have I seen the drive that I was able to muster up for the last 30-some years. And I don't know whether that's being originally born in Switzerland or whether it's the vision, whether it's the desire to have what I want. I tell everybody gladly that I live the American dream. And I think the American dream is that if you see something that you'd like, you acquire it the right way. You work hard for it, you're honest about it, you strive towards that success, and you find ways of making it happen. And I, being a bit naive, not being born to this country, I think that's the American dream. And I grabbed it and I still live it. Right now I'm back to working 18-hour days for a new little building that I'm working on because I want it done. I want it done right, and I want it done now. Ergo, I sleep 6 or 7 hours. Hey, that's still plenty enough, you know. So I don't know whether it's genetics or whether it's Alaskan or whether it's just a drive that is internal, and I don't know whether that could be taught or shared.
When did you decide, all right, I'm going to stay in Alaska? And tell us about that conversation with your family when you said, I'm going to become an American.
I actually, you know, with marriage, of course, comes the privilege that you get to stay here. So I was not really wanting to be American. I felt so Alaskan all these years, all these decades, that I really never needed to change the passport. It became clear that my lifestyle, dogs, elbow room, kids, and my wife, we could not fit into Switzerland. We had traveled quite a bit, and my family met Kathy and the boys, and they have been here. All of my relatives, or my close relatives, my mom came, I think, 13 or 14 times in the recent history. She now is going to turn 90, and she decided not to travel anymore. My dad passed away, but we got to meet everybody. They met the kids, and it was just, it's hard on my mom because her sonny boy is so far away, and if you're a mother, I guess you wish they were closer. But
you mentioned a couple epiphanies on the Iditarod Trail. What were some of the other insights that you gained in those early races?
You know, when you go through life, you have moments that touch you. And I had a friend, he was always happy, he was hardworking, and he still had a good time. So from him, from Peter Thoman, I learned that you can be happy, hardworking, and successful all at the same time. So as a young teenager, I sort of looked at him as a role model in that aspect. And then I was on the Iditarod Trail, and I was on thin ice, literally. The whole motion of the ocean was going up and down. And that was really unsettling to me. I happened to go out on thin ice. I followed an old dog track. And I couldn't believe that everything was moving very slowly, subtly going up and down. So I pushed off with my feet in between the runners, and sure enough, there is gray-green water bubbling up. And I say that's the ultimate cardiac test, because there's nothing but ocean, and then the bottom of the sea is under there. And so I beelined it. Those were the days when people still had a bit of a free roam wherever you wanted to go. As long as you got to Shaktoolik, you could go just about anywhere. And it was between Unalakleet and Shaktoolik. But I looked at that behind me, I looked at that gray-green water, and I came to this land knowing that one person and one dog team is pretty minute. In Alaska, if that had opened up, I would have gone down with my dogs and my sled, and it would have closed back up. And very little would have changed. On a grand scale, the country would be the same, the Iditarod would be the same. And I was certainly scared. But I was also put in place that almost Mother Nature accepted me for being part of it, because I made it. And then, of course, thinking about those sort of situations, you become at peace. And I think it's sort of a way of how you're put into place. You know, you might be important, you might think you're big, But on the grand scale, you're really nothing. So while you're here, you might as well have as a positive and as a good of an impact as you can possibly make. And I talk about that a lot as one of the shaping moments in my early 20s as becoming part of Alaska. And I felt like that ever since. And I hardly ever talk about that situation, but thinking about it, I know that was a very intense, very, very important few seconds or a few minutes by the time I was back on land. But it was an impact that stays with me and is probably one of those, if you quantify the shaping experiences you have as you're growing up, that's certainly one of them.
Walk us through a typical Martin Buser day. This time of year especially, I think it's hard for people to imagine what someone who races dogs and runs dogs in the winter does in the summertime.
We get that question a lot. What's a typical day? I say there is no typical day. There's no days are the same. Everything has to be done. And today's a good example. I knew you were coming. I only have 18 to 19 hours a day, so I'm working on a project. I knew the sky was going to be clear, so I start working at 5:30 a little bit because I knew I was going to have hopefully as good a interactions with you as possible. And that's something I learned from the dogs, that being in the moment, being focused on the now is very, very important to me. So we tried to fit all these things in and tried to do it well. And I learned that from the dogs. I prioritize the now. Don't hold grudges. Make plans, but don't look too far into the future, because the future might never come, especially if you're a racer on the Iditarod Trail, or if you're a wild animal, or if you're a dog.
Living in the moment became the focus of a life-changing day for him when Martin Buser chose to become an American.
If I talk about being a United States citizen, it goes back to 9/11. As we talked, I was Alaskan at heart. I was Alaskan to the point where I was asked to, and did, represent the President Clinton inaugural parade with my dog team in Washington, D.C. I did never feel the need to become American because I was Alaskan through and through. And my 9/11 story goes back to 6:45 a.m. It was a Tuesday morning. I was on my way to my local Rotary meeting when the second plane hit the tower, and I turned around and came home. Kept the kids and the wife home from school, and I said, this is a big deal. That very day, I decided to become a naturalized citizen. First and foremost, to prove to my family and my two boys, they were 12 and 14 at the time, that this is the soil I wanted to defend. If things needed to come to a head, I wanted to stay here and defend Alaska and America. Not turn tail and go to the safest country in the world, Switzerland, where the population can live underground and blah, blah, blah. There's neutrality and all that. So that started the process of, all of a sudden it became important for me to be naturalized. I had to write a sentence. She had a big dog. I spelled that correct. I had to take courses on American history, more so than most average high school students. Anyway, we started the swearing-in ceremony at the starting line in Anchorage. The INS people met me with my first American flag and the paperwork to be carried to the finish line and signed by the judge in Nome. And that's an unfakeable, untangible amount of energy that was created during the 2002 Iditarod. That's why I set a record at the time. That could not be faked. That could not be pretended. So that year I broke 2 records. I finished Iditarod in 8 days, 22 hours, 46 minutes, and 2 seconds, but who's counting? That's the fastest Iditarod ever at the time, but it also was the slowest and longest swearing-in ceremony ever. So it took the judge another day. That made 10 days for him to finally sign that piece of paper. And then, of course, to make that trifecta complete, Nikolai, my oldest son, met me 100 yards from the finish line with my first big American flag. And I carried that waving across the finish line in Nome. And they remember that. We had a few parties over that, and a few tears were shed over that. And then the judge came, and the next day we got sworn in under the Burled Arch. So Iditarod means a lot. The finish line means a lot to me. And I'll keep on doing the race. How competitive or how long I can be competitive, we don't know. But it certainly is going to be with me for the rest of my life. And if you do the numbers, I think I'll be 75 when I do my 50th Iditarod, in another 20 years or so.
With his passion for his dogs and his love of a hard day's work, it seems clear that Alaskans can look forward to watching Martin Buser continue his mastery of racing the Iditarod for decades to come.